She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You're just a nanny with a ring." Then she demanded I pack my things and leave her house. What she did not know was that I had the email, the one that proved her late husband left this house to me. Not her, not her son, but me. And when the police arrived and read the documents out loud, her face turned white. Do you think a mother-in-law like this deserves a second chance, or not at all? Let me know in the comments. And if you love true feeling stories full of twists, betrayal, and sweet revenge, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next one. My name is Rachel Monroe. I am 34 years old, a mother of 2 beautiful daughters, and I married into a family that wore masks so well that it took me years to see their real faces. When I first met Ethan, my husband, he was everything I thought I wanted. Polite, charming, successful, and most of all, a gentleman. He had been raised in a wealthy family, the kind with generational money, sprawling estates, and portraits of stoic ancestors on the walls. I came from a middle-class background, but I never cared about status. I cared about kindness. Ethan had that, or so I believed. His mother, Victoria Monroe, was the coldest woman I had ever met. Elegant, composed, and always watching me as if I was something stuck to the bottom of her designer heel. From the very beginning, she would smile at me with tight lips and call me dear, like it was an insult wrapped in velvet. I tried to win her over. I cooked, cleaned, hosted dinners, and made sure her every preference was met. I even let her decorate the nursery for our first child because she said it needed a Monroe touch. That should have been my first warning. We moved into the family estate 2 years after the wedding. It was a stunning Georgian-style mansion just outside Charleston, South Carolina. Ethan told me it belonged to his father, Charles Monroe, who had passed away the year before from a stroke. The house had a massive kitchen with white marble counters, ivy-covered balconies, and a library that smelled like old money and secrets. Victoria insisted she stay with us for a little while after the funeral. That little while became 2 years. 2 years of her criticizing my parenting, rolling her eyes when I folded laundry a different way, and whispering to Ethan behind closed doors. I endured it all, thinking that patience would eventually earn me her respect. But I was wrong. Victoria did not want a daughter-in-law. She wanted a servant who would know her place. Then, everything started to change the day I found the key. It was tucked inside an old book in the library, a dusty blue leather-bound volume of A Tale of Two Cities that no one had touched in decades. A note was folded around the key. It read, "For Rachel, this is yours now. Use it when you are ready. Charles." I froze. Why would Ethan's father leave me a key? I kept it hidden and said nothing, but from that day on, I started paying more attention. I began noticing how Ethan avoided questions about finances, how Victoria referred to the house as her property, even though she never produced a deed or paperwork. Then came the day everything unraveled. It was a rainy Tuesday. I had just returned from dropping the girls off at school when I walked into the kitchen and found Victoria seated at the head of the table, sipping tea like she owned the place. Ethan sat beside her, arms crossed, lips tight. "Rachel," she said calmly, "it is time you accept reality. You are not a partner. You are just a nanny with a ring." The words hit like a slap. I stared at her, confused. "You married up," she continued. "You live in a house you did not earn. This was my husband's home. You are nothing more than a guest, and your welcome has worn thin." Ethan said nothing, not a single word in my defense. Victoria stood, walked to the foyer, and returned with a suitcase. "You will leave today. I will allow you time to pack." I did not argue. I did not cry. I simply smiled and walked upstairs, because I had been planning for this moment for weeks. Ever since I found the key, I had been digging. I searched the old office, cracked passwords, and uncovered documents that proved Charles had quietly changed his will before his death. The house had been legally transferred, not to Ethan, not to Victoria, but to me. He had emailed me personally with the deed, knowing his wife would fight it. He had written that he saw how I held the family together while they pulled it apart. I printed everything and placed it in a folder, marked Final Answer. I came downstairs 20 minutes later, not with a suitcase, but with the folder. Victoria raised an eyebrow. "That better not be a list of excuses." I said nothing. I handed the folder to her and stepped back. Her eyes scanned the pages, and her smug smile faded into ash. "You forged this," she hissed. "No," I replied. "I confirmed it with the lawyer. Twice." She tried to speak again, but just then I opened my phone and called someone. "Are they on their way?" I asked. "Yes, ma'am," the voice replied. Exactly 6 minutes later, a police car pulled into the driveway. Victoria's face turned grey. I turned to her and said, "You have 30 minutes to gather your things." She looked at Ethan for help. He stared at the floor. That was when the first twist dropped, one I had not planned. Victoria did not pack anything. Instead, she walked calmly to the staircase, turned and said, "You may have won this round, but you have no idea what you have walked into." And then she smiled, not out of defeat, out of calculation. That was the first time I felt fear, not because of what she had said, but because of how Ethan looked at her, like he already knew what she meant. Because in that moment, I realized Victoria Monroe was not going to leave quietly, and she was not going to leave alone. Victoria did not speak a word as the officers escorted her to her room. She moved slowly, like a queen forced off her throne, but not one who believed her reign was over. I stood in the hallway as she gathered a few items, her silence louder than any insult she had ever thrown at me. When she passed me on the way out, she paused just long enough to whisper, "You will regret humiliating me." As the door closed behind her, the silence in the house felt unnatural. Ethan still sat at the kitchen table, unmoving. I looked at him, waiting for some kind of reaction, an apology, an explanation, something, but all he said was, "You should not have involved the police. That was unnecessary." I laughed. I could not help it. "Unnecessary? After what your mother said to me? After how she treated me for years?" "She is grieving," he replied flatly. "You could have handled this differently." That was the moment something shifted between us. I realized he never saw me as his equal. Just like his mother, he believed I should stay quiet, be grateful, and never dare to challenge the Monroe name. I spent the next few days re-establishing control over the house. I had the locks changed. I cleaned every room Victoria used as her personal domain. I moved my things into the master bedroom and removed every trace of her influence, from the throw pillows to the family portraits. It was symbolic. I was reclaiming what was already mine. But then the first letter arrived. It was hand-delivered by a man in a grey suit. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of heavy cream paper with the Monroe family crest embossed at the top. It read, "Enjoy your stolen comfort while it lasts. Blood always finds a way home." I felt a cold knot form in my chest. It was her, obviously, but the wording felt older, more ritualistic. I dismissed it as drama, part of her desperate attempt to regain control, but I kept the letter. Later that evening, as I was sorting mail, I found a second envelope addressed to Ethan. I placed it on the kitchen counter, curious but respectful enough not to open it. When Ethan came home, he took one look at the envelope, paled slightly, and tucked it into his coat without a word. That night, he avoided me entirely. The next morning, I woke up to find his closet half empty. His watch was gone, his laptop missing. I ran downstairs, only to find a note on the kitchen table. "Do not try to find me. I am staying with a friend. This house is cursed, and I want no part of it." No explanation, no goodbye to the girls, just vanished. I called him again and again, but he never picked up. I went to his office. He had quit the week before. I checked with his brother, who claimed he had not seen Ethan in days. That was when it dawned on me. Ethan had planned his exit the same way Victoria had planned her attack. It was not over. It was only beginning. Days passed. I started noticing small things around the house. Doors I had locked were found open in the morning. The girls' toys moved from one room to another. Lights flickered, and the thermostat would randomly reset itself to freezing. I thought I was imagining it until I reviewed footage from the front door camera. At 3:17 a.m., 2 nights before, a figure stood just beyond the gate. It was Victoria. She stood there for 10 full minutes, not moving, just staring at the house. I reported it to the police, but they said without evidence of a crime, there was nothing they could do. I considered getting a restraining order, but something told me this was not about proximity anymore. It was about power. Then came the biggest blow of all. I received a notice from the county courthouse. Victoria had filed a formal claim contesting the deed transfer, citing mental manipulation and fraudulent coercion. Her legal team was powerful and well-connected. She claimed Charles had not been of sound mind when he gifted me the property and that I had preyed on a dying man's grief. She had even convinced a doctor to backdate a psychiatric evaluation to support her claims. My attorney was shocked. "This is not about the house," he said. "This is about destroying you." Suddenly, my entire reality was under threat. If the court sided with her, I could lose everything. The home, the stability, and the protection I had built for my daughters. But I still had one card left to play. I remembered the key. Not the one to the house, but another key I had found hidden in Charles's study behind a false panel. It opened a fireproof safe in the library. Inside, I had discovered old journals, personal letters, and, most importantly, a video recording. It was dated 2 months before Charles's death. He sat in his office, wearing a cardigan, voice steady. "I have rewritten my will. My son is weak, and my wife has grown cruel. I give this house to Rachel, not because she is family by law, but because she has earned it by love. This home is not just wood and brick, it is a legacy, and I trust her to protect it far better than the vultures I married and raised." I watched it twice, then I sent a copy to my lawyer. The court hearing was in 2 weeks, and while I thought I was ready, I could not have imagined who would walk into that courtroom, and the secret they were about to expose that would shake the entire Monroe family tree to its roots. The courtroom was cold, not physically, but emotionally. It was a place built for confrontation, and every inch of it felt like it was designed to drain people of hope. I sat quietly next to my lawyer, my palms sweating despite the chill of the air conditioner above us. Victoria entered the room, wearing a tailored black suit, her silver hair pinned back, and not a single wrinkle in her expression. She looked like royalty returning to take back what was stolen. She did not look at me, not even once, but her lips curled slightly when she saw that Ethan was not sitting beside me. I had not heard from him in over a week. When the judge entered and the hearing began, Victoria's lawyer wasted no time in tearing into me. They painted me as an opportunist who had seduced a dying man for his estate. They questioned my background, my education, my ambitions. They even brought up an old photo of me working as a daycare assistant before I married Ethan, as if that disqualified me from being trusted. I kept silent. My lawyer stayed calm. When our turn came, he played the video. The courtroom was silent as Charles Monroe spoke from beyond the grave. His voice filled the room like thunder, measured, firm, and impossible to argue with. Victoria's face cracked for the first time, not with grief, with fury. She leaned forward and whispered something into her lawyer's ear. He hesitated. Then he stood up and requested a recess. The judge, clearly rattled by the new evidence, granted it. We stepped outside the courtroom. I was halfway down the hallway when someone grabbed my arm. It was a young woman, mid-20s, sharp brown eyes, trembling fingers. "Are you Rachel Monroe?" she asked. "Yes." "My name is Tessa," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "I need to talk to you, in private." I hesitated but followed her into a side room. What she said next nearly knocked the air out of my lungs. "I am Charles Monroe's daughter," she said. "What?" "His biological daughter. My mother had a brief relationship with him 30 years ago. I was raised by someone else, but Charles, he knew about me. He reached out 2 years ago, shortly before he died." I stared at her, stunned. She handed me a letter. It was handwritten, unmistakably in Charles's precise penmanship. In it, he explained everything: how he had learned of Tessa's existence, how he had sent her monthly support under a different name, and how he had left something for her in the house. I asked, "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because Victoria found out about me," she said. "She offered me money to disappear. I said no. Now I am being followed, watched. And if you lose this case, that letter goes with it. You are not just fighting for a house. You are fighting for every lie that woman has buried." Before I could say more, she left. vanished down the hall and out of sight. Back in the courtroom, something had shifted. Victoria sat straighter, angrier, more desperate. I could feel it. Her next move would not be legal. It would be personal. And I was right. That night, I returned home to find the front door wide open. I rushed in, calling for my daughters. Thankfully, they were safe. Our neighbor had picked them up from school at my request. But the house had been ransacked. Drawers pulled open, photo frames shattered, every surface overturned. On the library desk was a single message, carved deep into the wood. This house was never yours. The police came and took a report. They found no fingerprints, no forced entry, nothing to pin it on Victoria, but we both knew. I moved my daughters into a hotel the next day. I did not feel safe, not for a second. The second court date was more brutal than the first. Victoria's team submitted forged letters, suggesting I had threatened Charles into changing the deed. But before the judge could take the bait, my lawyer dropped his final piece of evidence, a recorded phone call from one of Charles's closest friends, a retired judge himself, who confirmed that Charles had been mentally sound when he changed his will. The judge called for closing arguments the next day. I thought that was the final twist, but then Ethan returned. He walked into the courtroom as if he had never left, hair unkempt, eyes sunken, and wearing the same coat I had seen him in last. He asked to speak on the record. I froze. He was sworn in and approached the witness stand. I was asked to disappear, he said. My mother said she would ruin Rachel unless I distanced myself. She offered to clear all my debts, fund a new business, everything I failed to do myself. I agreed, but she lied. She said Rachel had tricked my father. I believed her until I saw that video. The courtroom fell completely silent. I know now that Rachel is the only person who actually cared about this family, the only person who deserves that home. Victoria stood up so fast her chair slammed to the floor. "You traitor!" she shouted. The judge slammed the gavel, demanding order. Victoria's mask had shattered. She ranted, screamed, exposed herself in front of the courtroom until the bailiff had to escort her out. The next hour passed in a blur. The judge ruled in my favor. The house was legally mine. The false claims were dismissed. Victoria was issued a restraining order, and an investigation was launched into her attempts to bribe witnesses and fabricate documents. But even with all that, I knew she was not finished. The war was over on paper, but something told me she would not stop. Not until she had the final word, and I had no idea just how far she was willing to go for revenge. For the first time in years, the house felt quiet. No footsteps echoing from the hall, where Victoria used to patrol like a warden. No glances from Ethan silently asking me to tolerate more than any woman should have to. Just me, the girls, and a sense of victory that felt temporary. I moved back in a week after the final ruling. The locks had been changed again, the security system upgraded, and cameras installed in every entryway. I told myself I was safe, but deep down, I knew safety was just an illusion when someone like Victoria was still breathing. It began with the emails. The first came to my work inbox at the private school, where I had recently accepted a part-time administrative position. It was anonymous, with nothing in the body except a single image. Me, picking my daughters up from school, time-stamped and taken from a distance. The second email came the next morning, another photo, this time of the girls playing in the backyard. Different angle, closer. I filed a police report again, but they were just as helpless as before. Technically, no law has been broken, the officer told me, but I understand why you feel unsettled. Unsettled did not begin to cover it. I felt watched, cornered, and increasingly paranoid. I pulled the girls out of school and arranged for online tutoring. I started carrying pepper spray. I even changed my phone number, but the messages kept coming. Then, out of nowhere, Ethan returned to the house. Not to stay, he just stood at the gate, waiting until I noticed him on the camera feed. When I went outside, he looked like he had not slept in days. "I need to tell you something," he said, "but you have to promise to listen all the way through." I crossed my arms. "Start talking." He explained that after his testimony in court, Victoria cut him off completely. No money, no support, no contact. At first, he said it felt like punishment, but then it felt like freedom. He started seeing a therapist, got a low-paying job, and for once began living outside his mother's shadow. But he had also started digging into old family archives, storage units, safe deposit boxes. "What are you looking for?" I asked. "Answers," he replied, "about her, about who she really is." He pulled out a yellowed folder from his jacket and handed it to me. Inside were documents, court records, adoption papers, and a death certificate. I could not believe what I was seeing. Victoria Monroe was not her real name. She had changed it years before she met Charles. Her original name was Margaret Walker, and she had been investigated in another state for elder abuse, accused of isolating and manipulating a wealthy widower she later married and inherited from after his mysterious death. The charges were dropped due to a lack of evidence, but the timeline was chilling. Within months of his death, she had moved to South Carolina, reinvented herself, and set her sights on Charles Monroe. Ethan said, "My father may have been her second victim." I felt sick. She had buried her past so deeply that no one, not even her own son, had ever suspected. And now she was circling me, just as she had circled him. I realized the court battle had not been about the house at all. It had been about power. She lost in public, but she still believed she could control me in private. She was playing a longer, darker game, one I had just stepped into, without even knowing the rules. That night, I barely slept. I held my daughters close, listening for every sound. The next morning, I went outside and found something on the front porch. It was a dead bird placed carefully in a white gift box. No blood, no violence, just silence. There was no note, no need for one. The message was clear. I was next. I took the folder Ethan had given me and went straight to a private investigator. I told him everything and asked him to dig deeper into every corner of Victoria's past. I needed proof of her threats. I needed something that would end this nightmare once and for all. 1 week later, I got the call. He found something. Something even Victoria did not know had survived. A cassette tape, part of an estate inventory from her first husband, the man who died before she married Charles. It had been overlooked, labeled personal dictation. The PI had it transferred to digital and sent me the file. It was a recorded message from that man, dated 2 days before his death. He described how he had been afraid for his life, how Margaret, Victoria, had isolated him from friends and family, manipulated his medication, and gained access to his legal affairs. He ended the recording with 6 haunting words. If I vanish, it was her. I played the audio for Ethan. His face turned white. "This is what she does," I whispered. "She removes people, slowly, quietly, until no one even remembers who they were." He nodded, then said something I never thought I would hear. "We need to go to the FBI." We did. And that was when the final twist started to unfold. One that reached far beyond our family, our state, and even the house. Victoria Monroe was not just a vengeful mother-in-law. She was a predator, and we were only just beginning to understand how many people she had left behind in her pursuit of control. The FBI investigation moved slowly at first, like all government things do. But the moment they heard the recording from Victoria's first husband, things escalated. They subpoenaed her financial records, reached out to the original detectives from that old elder abuse case, and began interviewing people who had once been part of her carefully erased past. Meanwhile, I kept my daughters close, refusing to leave them alone for even a second. I had installed panic buttons in the house, hired private security, and even had a therapist start working with them to help process everything. But no amount of preparation could make me feel truly ready. The pressure was building, and I could feel Victoria's presence, like a shadow stretching farther than it ever should have. I received one final envelope, no postage, hand-delivered again. Inside was a single sentence scrawled in red ink. "Police cannot protect you from me." I showed it to the FBI agents assigned to the case. One of them just nodded and said, "That is the opening move. She is scared." That word, scared, was not one I ever thought I would hear applied to Victoria Monroe, but it made sense. She was not used to being on the defensive. She was used to manipulating from behind velvet curtains. Now those curtains were on fire, and she was scrambling to keep her world intact. Then, out of nowhere, the story broke. A former employee from Charles Monroe's estate, someone who had worked closely with Victoria in her early years, spoke to a local reporter and leaked parts of the FBI investigation. Within 24 hours, news of the probe into Victoria's past was on the front page of the Charleston Tribune. The article painted her as a person of interest in multiple suspicious deaths involving elderly men of wealth. It included quotes from the tape. It even referenced the Monroe family courtroom battle, though my name was kept anonymous. The next morning, my phone exploded. Reporters, lawyers, friends I had not spoken to in years. But the person I was most surprised to hear from was Tessa, the daughter Charles had fathered before marrying Victoria. She met me at a small cafe just outside the city. She looked stronger than before, steadier. "I saw the news," she said, "and I have something else for you." She pulled out a thin flash drive and slid it across the table. "It is a digital scan of the original birth certificate. It lists Charles as the father. I want to be part of this, because if we let her slip away again, more people will suffer." I asked where she had found it. She told me it was inside a locket her mother had kept hidden for years, sewn into the lining of a winter coat. It was the final proof we needed to confirm everything. That Victoria had known about Tessa from the beginning and still tried to erase her existence. That night, I received the call. The FBI had issued a warrant for Victoria Monroe's arrest. They wanted me to stay out of sight until they could locate and detain her, but she was already gone. She had fled the state 2 days before the news article broke. That was the moment I knew I had underestimated her one last time. She had seen this coming, and she had disappeared. The next month was a blur of interviews, depositions, and protective measures. My name eventually leaked to the public, and for a few weeks I became the brave daughter-in-law who exposed the Monroe matriarch. But attention fades fast. The FBI remained focused, and finally, after 38 days on the run, Victoria was found. She was living under an alias in a small cabin outside Asheville, North Carolina. When the agents arrived, she did not resist. She opened the door with a faint smile and said, "It took you long enough." The arrest made national headlines, but the trial, that was what shattered the illusion. For hours, days, weeks, the prosecution unveiled a pattern of quiet destruction that spanned decades. Financial manipulation, emotional coercion, suspected poisoning, and in each case, Victoria had come out wealthier, more respected, more feared. Ethan testified again. So did Tessa. So did I. And when the verdict came down, guilty on multiple counts of fraud, obstruction, and criminal conspiracy, I did not feel triumph. I felt peace. Peace because it was finally over. Peace because I no longer had to explain myself to anyone. And peace because for the first time in my adult life, I was no longer someone else's shadow. After the sentencing, Ethan came to see me one last time. He stood at the edge of the porch, hands in his pockets, eyes heavy with regret. "I am sorry," he said, "for everything, for believing her, for not standing up sooner." "I know," I replied, "but sorry does not fix it." He nodded, and then he left. I watched him walk away without the need to stop him. That part of my life had closed. The girls and I stayed in the house, which no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a home. Their laughter returned. I could hear it echoing through the halls. Victoria once ruled with silence. I framed Charles's letter, the one he left with the key, and placed it above the fireplace. It reminded me that love is not something people owe you. It is something they prove. Quietly, steadily, through action, not inheritance. Sometimes family is not who you marry or who shares your blood. Sometimes it is who chooses to stand by you when everything else falls apart. And as for Victoria, she now lives in a cold cement room without windows, without marble floors, and without control. The woman who once called me a nanny with a ring now has no audience left to impress. But I do. 2 young girls who look up to me every day, and I will never let them forget that strength is not found in silence. It is found in standing your ground, even when the world tells you to run. If you found this story powerful and want more real twist-filled stories like this, make sure to subscribe and never miss the next one. Your support means everything.